Please like and subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon to get new video updates.
Okay. It was, I remember it was a Thursday night, and it was about midnight, and I went into the kitchen to take my drugs, which I've been taking for many, many years, probably 14 years for, lo and behold, depression, and its little partner, obsessive compulsive disorder. And just as I was tapping them into my palm, my fiance of the time sort of darted by me and darted downstairs into the basement, and I said, "Honey, where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going to my lab," because he's a chemist and he has a lab, he had, I should say, a lab in the basement where he made his drugs while I took my drugs. So he went downstairs to the basement, and I tapped the 480 milligrams of Prozac into my palm and took them with water. And just as I was probably downing about the last one, I heard from the basement this blood-curdling scream. And I am actually a person, even though I look like, you know, with the frill and everything, like I look like I'm fairly sheltered. I'm a person who's heard a fair number of screams in her life. I'm a therapist, and I'm also a veteran at a mental hospital, so I've heard a lot of screams. And this one was definitely a scream to top all screams, and I seriously could not imagine what this could be. The only thing I could think was that someone had somehow climbed in the basement window and was murdering my fiance, although that seemed unlikely because the basement window was so small. But in any case, I ran downstairs really, really fast, and I flung open the door to his lab, and he was standing there, and he was just ringed in fire. He had, I should say, really long, beautiful strawberry blonde hair, and that was the thing that I remember the most, was that it was just, you know, like this Medusa-like flames around his head, and his whole body was just fringed with fire. And I stood there, and I know that this happened really fast, but in my mind this moment slowed down, and I stood there just for a second, but it seemed like for a long time. And I remember thinking, this is the oddest thing, that just 2 minutes ago I was a woman who was engaged to be married and who had had some significant difficulties in her life but had more or less overcome them, and now all of a sudden my whole life narrative is going to change, and I'm going to be a woman who from this point on will say that she watched her lover burn to death in a fire. And how strange that would suddenly become a plot point in my life. And I remember thinking that, and then the moment passed, and I ran forward, and just as I did that, he was holding a beaker in his hand. The fire was some chemical that should never have touched air, and because air got into it, it spontaneously combusted. And he dropped the beaker, and he started like patting the fire out, even though his hands were also on fire. He was patting. He just stamped it out all over his body, and then. But a chemical fire is different from, at least from what I saw, a chemical fire is different from a normal fire, in that this fire, as soon as it was out of his body and he was now no longer on fire, it started leaping and like skipping around the room, and his lab was just packed with chemicals that should not have been in the house. I mean, it was just packed with toxic combustible chemicals. And I pulled him out of the lab, and I was like, "Come on, we gotta go, the house is gonna blow up, we gotta go now." And he kept running back into the lab. And finally, there was a sort of strange tug of war between us, and then he managed to get back into the lab, and he took this fire extinguisher that I guess he obviously had there for just this sort of event, and he was going, shit, he couldn't figure out how to work it, and then he figured out how to work it, and the fire extinguisher, like, and the whole room went up in like this white, like, foam with this rancid stink. And we ran upstairs, and his hair was gone, his eyelashes were gone, his skin was bubbling, and I was like, "I love you, I love you, I love you." I ran to the freezer, and I started throwing like whatever I could, any like ice cubes, Tropicana cans, whatever, just throwing them at him. And I just kept saying, "I love you, I love you." And he's like, chemist to the very end, he's like, "Lauren, just stay calm, go to the CVS and get me zinc oxide and aloe vera and bandages." So I went to the CVS and I got him this stuff, and it was in the car that like his screams just kept going in my head. It wasn't even the sight of him on fire, it was his screams. And I came back, and the next day soon after that we went to the emergency room, and he had some scarring on his eardrum, but he was pronounced basically hairless but okay. But the thing was that I wasn't okay after that, because I kept hearing his screams, and I kept thinking, what, more than the sight of him, it was the vision, it was the sound of him, and I kept thinking, I agreed to marry this man, and when you agree to marry someone, you agree to a degree of intimacy that includes all kinds of intimate sounds, but this was a sound that I did not agree to ever hear, and this was the sound of like the cortex being peeled back and like pure limbic terror. I knew what he would sound like at the moment of death, and I did not want that knowledge of him, and I did not know if I could marry him with that knowledge. And what basically happened is that I became depressed, and our relationship became depressed. I had always thought that depression was something that happened just to an individual, but from this experience I learned that it can happen. Depression can be the third variable. It can happen between people. We had, all the diagnostic criteria. We had the neurovegetative symptoms. We had psychomotor retardation. We stopped having sex. Our appetites in all sorts of ways fell off. And I remember thinking, I really, really don't know if I can marry this man, because his screams kept replaying in my head. And I didn't know how I would ever integrate that with the rest of him or with our relationship. Now it's about 4 or 5 years later, and I am, actually my ring kind of fell off, but I am in fact married to him. And so I've been thinking, like, what was it that enabled me to move beyond those screams and move beyond that knowledge of him and move beyond the depression that existed between us? And I don't have any grand answers, but I do have some sort of clues, and one of them is just simply time. As time went on, lo and behold, his screams started to sort of fade in my mind, and I was able to sort of put them in a different place in my brain. And also, as time went on, I was able to start remembering the event a little bit differently, and this is something that is interesting in depression. When you're depressed, you will look at your past and see it in one way, and as the depression starts to lift, you maybe look at your past or look at past events and see them in another way. And whereas while we were depressed, I had thought, this guy is just such a loser, he's such a goon, I can't believe he almost blew up our house. I started remembering, well, he had got the fire extinguisher. He did figure out how to work it in a crisis, and like that's something I never would have been able to do. And I started to sort of see him as being potentially competent again, where I hadn't seen him that way before. And the other thing that happened was I went to a writers' conference, and this was the first time we'd been away from each other in a while, and I got really, really drunk at this writers' conference. And there was all these famous writers there, like Susan Orlean and Gore Vidal, like that. It wasn't Janet Maslin, but it was some like really serious higher up at the New York Times. And I got really, really drunk, and I told them the whole story of the fire, like at this conference, at this dinner, and they were all like, "Don't." And I said, "Should I marry him?" And they were all like, "Don't, definitely do not marry this guy." This is except Gore Vidal. And if Gore Vidal says you should marry someone, then you should marry them. So I came back, and we decided that we were in fact going to go ahead and get married. And Benjamin said, given everything that we've been through, the kind of wedding I propose is that we have a naked wedding. And I said, that's not going to happen. You blew up the house, you're not going to get a naked wedding. He said, it's really important, given the descent and the ascent and the symbolism of all this, that we have a naked wedding, and this is one thing that I really, really want. So I said, if you really, really want a naked wedding, you can have your naked wedding. I'm wearing a towel. So he said, all right, you wear a towel, but everybody who comes has to be naked too. And I said, there's no way that my friends, who are all writers and have significant neuroses and anxieties, there's no way that my friends are going to come to our wedding and be naked, and you can't force them to do that. And he said, well, all right, it's voluntary, whatever. But in any case, the day before the wedding, like this kind of strange giddiness came over me. It's a giddiness that I liken sometimes to what happens when a depression is lifted, and you're like, whoa, life, here it is. And I decided I went to a tattoo parlor, and And I got this belt tattooed around my waist of all of his favorite molecules, including the molecular structure of fire. And I thought I was thinner at the time, and I thought this tattoo belt looks really awesome on me. Maybe I should go naked. But I still was up in the air about it. So anyway, the day of the wedding comes. He's in a bathrobe. I'm in a bathrobe. Our friends come over. And the weirdest thing, he hired 2 witches to officiate this ceremony, but they were also like legally married. But so the witches come, all my writer friends come. They've got all kinds of aches and pains, and are just not the type to go naked. And the weirdest thing is that his friends all went naked. And this strange hush came over the house, and I swear to God, this is true. My friends all dropped trout. They all went naked. His parents went naked. And then it was time for us. We came downstairs. We walked down the stairs. We were both in bathrobes, and he took off his bathrobe, and then I took off my bathrobe, and I was naked. And we got married that way. But I wasn't facing the crowd. I was facing away from the crowd, so it was only my back. And then at the end, these witches who were pierced like all over said, in order to fully consummate your wedding, you now need to turn around and face the crowd, which is something that, having a large chest, I was like, that was just totally something I didn't think that I could do. But I did. We both turned around and we faced the crowd. And I was just like, here I am. And it was this moment when we were completely bare and silly and scared and strong and all of those things together. And it was at that moment that, we said, I do, in sickness and in health, for better and for worse. And we're still married today. And that's the end. Thank you.